for 45 minutes, as that is going to be such a privilege for us all. And just to let you know, you are being recorded. So if you have a problem with that, please turn your camera off. This is the first of two KXs today. We will be running till 1:14, at which point we will be sharply cut off. And a link, just before that, a link will be put into the second KX, which runs from 1:15 till 2 o'clock. They're a fantastic juxtaposition, I think. So firstly, we're very excited to have Tom Greenwood here, talking about his fantastic new book, Overton's Garden. And then the second KX will be shifting very much into the new rules of net zero. And we're really pleased to have Emily Faint from the BSI and Katrina Bryan, Dr. Katrina Bryan from GRI. More of that at 1:15. So I was thinking that first I'd just do 1 minute on business declares. I think most of you are aware of what we do, but we are a not-for-profit. We've been around since 2019. Fantastic to have our founder, Fiona, here with us today. We're completely reliant on donations to keep going, on your donations. So the link will be going in the chat. And our purpose is to inspire, encourage, and accelerate action within the business community to tackle the climate, ecological, and social emergencies of the polycrisis. For any further information, look at our manifesto and our website, and links will be going up in the chat. So next, over the moon to have Tom here. It's a very long intro for Tom. I won't cover everything, but let me just try and give a flavour of Tom. His background is in design and sustainability. He's an ethical business pioneer, winning the UK government's Business Leaders of Tomorrow Award for his forward approach and always pushing the boundaries of thought. He was a co-founder of Whole Grain Digital, a founding member of Business Declares. We worked together a while ago on a digital toolkit, which at the time I think people were certainly questioning me on how important was digital on the footprint. And obviously no one is questioning that right now. He's author of the influential Sustainable Web Design book, which people are always referring to, and also the world's first carbon website calculator, which still is available freely for people to use. He's on the House of Life podcast, Oxymoron website, and also do check out the film Responsible, which features Tom and Vanita when it looks at businesses that are really leading the way in their sustainable practices. I think another way of putting it is Tom is a lover of wisdom and living and exploring big, difficult, necessary ideas to stretch thinking on how we can move forward towards a better world for everyone, human and non-human. And that brings us to his fantastic book, Overton's Garden. And I think really today's going to be a conversation with all of you. We shall start with Tom. I will chat with him, ask a few questions. We're going to run some thought experiments with you all and hopefully chip in from those that have already read the book and any of your questions. So just keep putting them in the chat as well, because we'd like all of you to be involved in this. So firstly, I'd say over to Tom, a bit of a background on what brought you to this to write this amazing book.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. So I guess what brought me to write the book was there was a sort of a growing sense of frustration in myself. I think I'd spent many, many years trying to sort of figure out how to live well, how to run a business in what I thought was a responsible way, and very much sort of surrounding myself with people of a similar ethos, trying to do similar things, and gradually over time, what I felt was that I had moved, and many people around me were telling me in private they had also sort of sensed a similar thing where, when we were younger, we there was this real sense of optimism, of like, okay, yes, there are there are environmental issues and there are social issues, but there's very much like a sense that there's lots we can do about this, and these are all solvable problems. And so it's a great challenge to be able to be involved in trying to solve those things and be driven by that hope forwards. And then skip forward sort of 20-25 years ish, maybe longer. And we sort of find ourselves now in this strange space where more and more people are sort of feeling this sense of stuckness, that actually things aren't trending in the right direction, and that those things that we thought were going to work, it's not that none of it's worked. It's like loads of great things have happened, but if you look at sort of the general direction of travel of the big things, like you talked about the polycrisis, it feels like we don't really know what to do anymore. Hence, lots of people are sort of having this sense of panic and stuckness and frustration. And the book was really born of that. And and it was sort of an epiphany one day when I was meditating that that I needed to write this book, and it was going to be called Overton's Garden, and it all just kind of burst out in one go, including the structure and everything. But the idea being that I think when we're feeling a sense of stuckness, we need to break outside of the box we're in. And people are always, using the sort of cliche of thinking outside of the box, but rarely do we actually stop and think deeply about like what boxes, and I say that plural, what boxes are we really in, and how did we get in them, and who put us there, um, and where are the cracks? Where are there little cracks that we could sort of get a fingernail into and start plying back? And these boxes are often not like physical constraints. Yes, there are physical constraints. There's always physical constraints, but they're often social constraints, and then social constraints are often mental and emotional constraints. Um, and so the idea of the book, the reason it's called Overton's Garden, for anyone who's not familiar, is it's based on the idea of the Overton window, which is in politics, it's the window of acceptable thought. So at any point in time, there's basically a kind of an invisible box that has all the things that society considers acceptable ideas at that point in time. And politicians are generally advised to only talk about things inside of that narrow little window, because that's good for their careers, and anything outside of it, even if those things outside of it are brilliant ideas, if they're outside of the window of what people consider acceptable, then people are going to think they're a bit weird and crazy, and maybe don't know what they're talking about, and so it'd be bad for your career to talk about that. And that applies to politics, but it applies to just society in general. Like, we all have it right here on this webinar. There are certain things thoughts might go through your head, and you'll think, no, I won't put that in the comments. Or you're hanging out with friends, and there's always this sort of natural filtering that's happening in any situation. So we always have these little windows of acceptable thought that we're living in, and we don't necessarily realize we're living in them. And there's the sort of the classic quote, which Einstein probably never said, but nevertheless, that you can't create a different outcome with the same level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. You can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created the problem. And so I think we're at a point now with this growing sense of stuckness that really what we need to expand our minds to see possibilities that we just can't see. To see possibilities we can't see, we have to see ourselves differently, each other differently, the fabric and structure of society differently, and realize that things are not as fixed as they seem. And so hence it's called Overton's Garden, because it's basically saying, okay, what would happen if we stepped outside of the window, the Overton's window, into the garden, and start exploring? And the fact that it's the window of acceptable thought means that inherently the garden has a big sign on the back door of the house has a sign on it saying, like, danger, do not enter. Wild animals roam here. Poisonous plants may sort of be abundant, and so on. But we need to go out there. That's sort of my view, and the book is really an invitation for anybody who's feeling like, yeah, you know what, actually, I think I'd like to go and explore outside of the garden. The book sort of takes you on a journey to help you begin to do that. And it's not a book about me telling you what the solutions are. It's a book about me taking you on a journey to try to help you see perspectives you might not have seen, and in the process, hopefully, sort of challenge you to have new thoughts of your own, and to re- change your relationship with the world around you, with the people around you, um, in your own way, not in a way that I prescribe or anybody else prescribes. Um, and by opening that kind of window of thought and window of possibility, and helping you kind of reignite your own creativity and like creative hope, I call it, because it's really sort of creativity to drive us forwards towards something that we can get excited and inspired by. Um, I hope that in some way, everybody who reads it, whatever that way may be, even if it's sort of something that you can't really quite describe, everybody will come away and somehow they'll end up showing up in the world differently in a way that makes a difference to them, makes a difference to the people around them, and hopefully somehow ripples out. Um, yeah, so that's sort of my elevator pitch, I guess, for the book. Um, the
Well,
tagline of the book is "Unlimit your thinking to create a better world," and that's sort of really the objective of it.
and it is a fantastic book. I couldn't put it down. So there's a better testament. And I think the way it lead, and I think your writing, it can be a heavy subject. It could be depressing, but you do sort of you infuse it with a lightness and a humor, which I think is part of the thinking that you say it needs. We can't get too bogged down and stuck, and we need this sort of lightness and humor to allow us to have some of these thoughts. And I'd like to sort of in the conversation a bit later, you help us and give advice on how we can kind of enter that garden and how we can do kind of some of the work ourselves to get that kind of thinking. But I think it was also fantastic in the book that maybe some people that go, I'm already in that garden. I'm not in a box, I'm not, it's like all of us have those moments. So I'd kind of be interested if there are any moments that you had as you started to write the book of things that perhaps surprised you the most that you uncovered.
Yeah, I mean, lots of this stuff. I mean, definitely yes, and there's lots of stuff that I guess another thing that motivated the book as well is there's lots of things I've just come across over the years that have forced me to kind of push against the edges of realize that I'm in a box that I didn't know I was in and push against the edges of it. Um, I mean, I guess a big one of those is the monetary system, which might sound like a bit of a dry topic, but it's one of those things. I mean, Sam and you and I talked a little bit about this once. Um, it's one of those things that is rarely talked about, as if like that's something that like economists and bankers and financiers, they deal with that. They deal with like how money works and stuff like that, and then we'll deal with you know wind turbines and you know rewilding land and things like that. And yet when you get into it and you unpick like what is money and how does it work and where does it come from and what does it do in our society, you realize that actually this is so profoundly impactful on the way we live and the way we relate to each other and all of these things that we describe as the polycrisis, whether it's social issues or environmental issues, that actually they're built on this foundation of a monetary system that doesn't function the way that most people think it does. And the book, and it's very, very hard to explain, and it's intentionally obtuse. Do you know what I mean? It's one of these things that you're not meant to understand how this all works. Um, and so I think that's one of the things that a lot of people will probably find surprising, that really was like when I learned about this stuff, Vanita will tell you I was a bit disoriented for many days. So I've done my best to try to sort of take people on a bit of a journey to understand that. But also other things. I mean, you and I, Samantha, talked about this. The fact that like my dad worked for an oil company. Part of the reason that I'm so interested in environmental things is because I grew up in a family where my dad worked for an oil company, my uncle worked for an oil company, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but like the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska in 1989, I think it was, like really affected me because my dad worked for that company, and I had a different relationship with it than probably the average kid my age, but over the years, having a dad who works in an oil company and is like very very defensive of it, but he's a very clever man, and it's sort of in a weird way now I can look back and say it's sort of a privilege in a way to have had that insight and to be able to see things from my perspective and from his perspective and realize that there are things that, like, it's not binary. He's right about a lot of stuff, and I'm probably right about some stuff. And but you know what I mean? It's like I think we live in a world where our perspectives are so often like it's either this or it's that, and this is good and this is bad. Um, and I think that's one of the things for me doing the research for this book, rather than a specific thing, has just been this realization that actually everything is messy. Um, and that, you know, we try to put things in these neat little categories, and actually that's part of the thing that trips us up a lot of the time, is that we find it really hard to actually just say that no, lots of um, there's lots of good things in this thing that is broadly we think is as bad, but there's lots of flaws and problems in these things that we broadly think of as good, and we need to really be able to just hold space for what is, rather than feeling like we need to kind of pick sides and put things in boxes, um, and just see things as they are. So that's a bit of a waffly answer, but hopefully it's helpful in some way.
Not at all. I think not polarizing,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
we all, as like the human condition, we take pleasure in certainty and knowing and in being right and
Yeah,
holding that uncertainty and being on the fence. Um, I think is absolutely important, and being able to change our mind. You know, all of us are working through how we're going to get to the place we want to be, how we're going to look after this planet, and solutions and ideas are changing all the time, and it's got to keep space for that. How helpful do you think some kind of spiritual practice, and you know, a lot of these for me is based in Buddhism, has that helped you in kind of holding these paradoxes?
yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, and I'd say that my sort of practices and whatever you want to call them, like, but they're very sort of evolving and uniquely mine. Like, I don't have like a fixed thing that I do or that I follow. Um, but I do think that generally speaking, um, having some practices that you do to like help you look within yourself, and sort of hold space for paradoxes and complexities and unknowns and things, whatever it might be. I don't think it, you know, it's not, there's not one right way, but I think we live in a world where we're sort of, it's changing, but broadly speaking, I think it's probably fair to say most of us are brought up in a sort of very material kind of like rational minded um, society and culture where, you know, you get up and you just do things because that's what you do, rather than really spending deep time in contemplation, and contemplating the non-material as well as the material, I'd say. So um, I think it's important, but I think it's very personal, and we've all got to just like find our own ways of doing things. Yeah. But you
If
know,
you
in the
were going to,
book, it goes into like a whole bunch of stuff on that topic to help people sort of unpick their minds. Um, and it doesn't tell people there's one way, but I mean, there is a whole chapter on psychedelics, for example. Not because I'm trying to say that that's the solution to things, um, but because I'm trying to highlight how our culture is sort of almost too focused the other way, of like discouraging us from really looking deeply inwards, and looking at these paradoxes and deeper wisdom that actually has been here all along, and it's all around us, and we have ways of accessing it that we're not generally kind of, most of us are not raised to know about.
yeah, the other, you touch on Ian McGilchrist's work as well, and the sort of, I find the left brain, right brain thinking. I think all of us in our work, you know, the left brain thinking is much more task oriented and very narrow, and rewards itself on being right and solutions. And the right brain is that one that, for me, I describe to myself out in nature. You suddenly see the sky, you can smell the air, you can feel things at feet, and that's a much more open space to think, and kind of bringing it sort of more into the sustainability world. I feel that it'd be interesting to hear you talk about it, but a lot of the measurement has very much become sort of very left brain thinking and very narrow, and numbers, datas, more number and data every year,
Yeah.
and actually forgetting what we're trying, coming back and saying actually what we're trying to achieve. And I think, I mean, you had a beautiful summary on what actually is sustainability, widening the net of resilience to encompass as many people as possible, and actually kind of reminding ourselves. And I think you also talk about sustainability groupthink.
Mm.
And so I'd love to hear a bit more on, and a lot of boxes came up for me on this, which I'll touch on. But if you wanted to sort of just talk a bit more about on the importance of measurement, but how it's trapping as a bit as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because I think it's always this thing about like measurements are useful, but they're also sort of traps that there's the classic phrase. I think it might be in the book somewhere. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's sort of business partner, um, billionaire investor. So he's not the sort of person you think about in in these contexts, but he often says, "Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." And what he's really getting at is that things like measurements are incentives because our minds narrow in on them, and then once you've got that target, then you start thinking that the number, which is an abstraction of reality, you start thinking that number is reality, that it is the thing that matters, and that's all that matters. We just need to change the number, um, and you lose sense of this like huge, beautiful, complex wholeness of of reality. Of course, Charlie Munger doesn't say that bit, but um, one of the things I do in the book is I try to sort of just bring people's minds to really try to be able to hold that it's not that measuring things is bad. Like measuring things is really useful. If I want to chop a piece of wood, I want to measure it and make sure I get it the right length. But um, but when we live in a world where like all we're doing is measuring, and we haven't even asked like why we're measuring what we're measuring and whether what we're measuring is the right thing to measure. So it's not just about measuring itself can be a thing that we need to step away from sometimes to be able to see the bigger picture, but also the fact that even when we're measuring, we really need to make sure that we're measuring what matters to us and that we're constantly re-evaluating that and making sure that it is what matters to us and it's what matters to the world around us rather than getting into a sort of a rut of well, will we measure this because this is what we always measure, and it's what my father measured, and it's what his father before him measured, and and because then you end up kind of locking in a future when you're trying to open up possibilities for the future and open up hope and inspiration. You can actually like get trapped in these things where if all we're doing is the same thing we did yesterday and the day before and the day before, then you're in this sort of the rational mind has sort of locked you on a fixed track that when actually maybe you need to find ways of branching out.
Yeah, and that fitted so well with the Business Declares Manifesto. I think it was coming up for 2 years ago where we suddenly felt that this whole measurement and marking people's work had taken us away, where we wanted to step back and say, actually, what does your business do?
Mm.
And very simply, is it part of the solutions, or at least thinking about the solutions versus trying to spending all time keeping the system as is? And so, yeah, that linked in really
Yeah,
well. We've got to,
and just quickly on that, like B
yeah.
Corp is another good example of that, where obviously, my company is certified B Corp, and I've been a big supporter of the B Corp movement since it came to the UK many years ago, and I think it's got a lot of good things going for it, and it does a lot of good. But you can get trapped in the measurement that it's like, well, we just need to get points, and then everything's great. And actually, you need to step away
Absolutely.
from that and say, no, but what does your business do, and what does that really mean, and ask those bigger questions that aren't necessarily included in the assessment process.
We've got some questions coming in. One from Ben Tolhurst, who's saying, I'm curious about how people can discover they are in a box, what the box is, and how to move out of it. I mean, I briefly touched on even the theory you work I did a long time ago, which is about firstly ensuring that you've got all the voices in a conversation within any issue that you're looking at, not just the ones that we're back to your sort of orders, not just the ones that agree with you. And he also asks a little bit more about how we discover spiritual practices that make sense to them. And Nick Whitnell comes back with something on that as well. So we might want to invite him in after you've put any more thoughts on how you discover those boxes that you're in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you in terms of the conversations we have with people. You know, one of the things I try to highlight in the book is that we need to be able to talk to people, that not just people we don't normally talk to, but people who we feel uncomfortable talking to. Because talking to somebody doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you're endorsing them. It just means you're listening, you're learning, and you're hearing. And everybody's perspective is valid on some level, even if they're, you know, you might think someone's technically wrong, but it's interesting to inquire, like, okay, but why does this person believe this, and what is it that they believe, and contrast that with your own. So, and sometimes you find out, like, oh, actually, I'm the one with the blind spot, you know, and I think that's a really powerful thing. So, I would say that's one of the most powerful things, is to be able to just do that. And similarly with like information sources, rather than always looking at this information sources that you think are credible, to actually hold space in your mind to say, well, other people are looking at other information sources. I might think they're not credible sources, but other people are looking at them. So what is over there? And actually be able to, you know, this is the thing about the garden, being able to say, well, I'm going to go over to that really brambly corner of the garden and like, you know, put some gloves on and pull some of it back and see what's in there. Not because I necessarily think I want to live in that corner of the garden, but because I want to have a holistic perspective. I want to understand what's there, and it's amazing what you can learn just by doing that. And this thing about, like, you know, there's a lot of truth, there's a lot of partial truths and things that seem wrong on the surface, and so there's a lot of stuff to discover there. But yeah, mostly I think it is about getting outside of your own box by going to places and doing things that you wouldn't normally do, even trying things you wouldn't normally do. Um, yeah, so just do something different. Talk to
It's
someone
kind
different.
of, yeah, Sam Baker has that kind of question, which is the comfort zone. How do you get people to move out of those zones, make them feel safe, and encourage them to take and embrace more uncertainty? I mean, that's huge for us in our work at Business Declares, where, you know, very senior business leaders who you think of as, you know, often hide behind what other business leaders are doing and what feels safe,
Yeah.
versus rocking the boat.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think there's sort of layers to it, and I think the first layer is really to find safety within yourself, to believe within yourself that if I contemplate ideas that are outside of what I would normally think are acceptable ideas or the right ideas, um, that I'm not endorsing them. I'm just looking at them, and there's nothing sort of scary about looking at them. So actually, just being able to, even before you do the thing of going and talking to a real human who maybe you think you might struggle to talk to, you can find places where you can hear them talking without having to face them, you know, and just see whether you can find comfort within yourself to just listen and hold space, and be able to sort of compare and contrast things within yourself in a very non-judgmental way, and then gradually find safe spaces with sort of friends. You know, the fact that you know, Nick's here, and Nick's written the foreword to the book, and that's one of the things that, you know, Nick has provided to me. Hopefully, I've provided to him as well. Is that safe space where we can bounce around ideas that we wouldn't necessarily discuss on LinkedIn, for example, and and we're just doing it in private to say, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And not because we're trying to, like, necessarily drive any particular agenda, but we're actually just trying to explore the landscape of our reality. And so I think if you can just find one or two people who you feel safe around to really say, I was thinking this, but I don't, you know, wouldn't normally feel comfortable telling people is what I'm thinking. I think it's amazing how much it can open up within yourself to just have one person, two people who you can have those conversations with. And then you realize that actually these ideas in my head weren't as crazy as I thought they were. And then you go and talk to a few more people about them, and then they say, oh yeah, thanks for saying that, I've been thinking something similar. But I thought I was crazy, you know. And so you don't have to go and, like, announce everything, you know, on a kind of on a big scale, which would be very scary, potentially sort of dangerous. But yeah, name it to tame it, exactly, Ben. Um, just start small within yourself and with a few kind of close people who you feel safe with to um, expand what you feel comfortable talking about. I think that's a good start.
I wondered if we wanted to invite Nick in for a moment because he's building on your point of regulating your nervous system. I think that means, not being triggered and reacting to what you
Exactly.
hear, but also not defining, this is one for me, not defining yourself by getting things right or
Yeah.
scoring more marks, but actually being willing to unravel and allow things to not be correct. So Nick, I don't know if you wanted to chip in for a minute how you regulated your nervous system, things that,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. And I think yeah, it's really interesting hearing the conversation because it has been a real honor and privilege to be alongside Tom and Vanita as well. Like these sort of conversations that we have around just what are we sensing? And I think that's been my definitely my journey towards leaving the corporate world. I was in that space, my nervous system was completely and utterly fried. And I think that I had this sense, and I do believe deeply that we all hold a inner blueprint that we have within us, which could be a soul, it could be whatever our spiritual beliefs are, whatever it is that we kind of sense in that way. But that we have to find the conditions to access it. And I think there's so much noise, there's so much constant barrage of things happening, whether that be through our working lives, the traumas we experience, the collective or individual traumas that we experience. But fundamentally, we lose ourselves somewhere within it. And I think, the poet Mary Oliver talks a lot about this of at some point, our own voice becomes louder than the ones around us. And we have to find a way of making that possible. And I think that's what, I've definitely enjoyed in these conversations that we've been having is that some of the things that I consider as being off the topic, I thought I was the weird one, be a bit like, I'm sensing something that doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel logical, doesn't feel believable. But if the group think is going in another direction, and that can be included within the sustainability world, then I feel then that I'm caught up in some dogma, which may not actually be something I believe as being true. So therefore, you have to find the trusted sort of voices which come from the self-compassion within to then say, well, how do I nurture my own nervous system? But then the collective and the circles I then become part of become the joy and the beauty of just navigating what opens up. And I think that's what I've definitely enjoyed. And Tom and I became close friends sort of during the pandemic time. It was just after that we used to go and have coffees in the New Forest because we lived close to one another. And I was new to this world. I wasn't from the same world as lots of you. You will have way more sort of credentials in the sustainability world. But I was like, it doesn't feel right. And I was from a hippie background. My mum was a full-blown sort of feminist OG hippie. And I kind of silenced it because I had to, because that was my survival through corporate life, because I had to start earning money. But at some point, we have to say, I don't know what's going on. And I think that's kind of what I'm sensing within the work I'm now doing and the stuff that Tom and I talk about is we need to find another way of accessing something that might be true. Otherwise, we're going to do Emperor's New Clothes and find a different version of what may or may not be helpful. The answer could be deeply uncomfortable. And that's the bit that I think Tom's book is pushing on is this idea that what might we have to let go of? What might we have to accept as being a truth that is really uncomfortable and we may not be able to have our cake and eat it. And I think that sits outside of some of the sort of work that we might have been seeing in other places. So yeah, it's been a real journey, which will continue to be that way. And I think Tom's book is a genuine, real amazing exploration of themes that don't get spoken about. And I just feel, yeah, really honoured to be sort of here just to, kind of witness it and kind of support it. And I think that everyone will enjoy just having the space just to really say, no, none of us have the answer. Every philosophical and religious spiritual practice says if you say you know the way, you don't know the way. So I don't think any of us are here to say read the book and you'll get the answers. I would say just follow your heart, follow your truth, follow the love. And that to me is Mother Earth. That is the stuff we're all here to talk about. So yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you, I'm kind of constantly experimenting and having these ongoing conversations. But for me, it's just about curiosity and compassion.
that's brilliant, Nick. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Now then, we have a hard stop. So I think we've got about 10 minutes left, Tom. So there
Wow,
was
it's
a
going
couple,
fast.
I know, I've got so many questions. Um, but I don't know if you wanted, is this a good lead into one of the experiments you talked about?
Well,
Whichever.
maybe we'll do the one that's probably relatively quick to do, which is really just for us to do a little experiment with the reaction emojis here on Zoom, um, and to to highlight the fact that everybody has a different like window of acceptable thought or acceptable behaviors. Um, and so if you can all find the little reaction things, the little heart at the bottom of your screen, if you click it, there's different emojis. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to like call out some things, and If you think this is inside your window of acceptable thought, then give it an appropriate emoji, like a thumbs up or a heart or a celebration. If you think this is like uncomfortable and outside of your window of acceptable thought or behavior, give it an sort of an appropriately negative emoji, like the shocked face, or or a red cross, or something that sort of suggests that. So, and then we're just going to just to get a sense of what do people think is acceptable. So, are you ready?
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to start with an easy one. Eating cornflakes for breakfast. Oh, somebody thinks that's shocking. Oh, a few people think that's shocking. Which, see, well, even cornflakes can be can have different opinions. Eating curry for breakfast. There's actually a surprising amount of love for that. Wearing a swimming costume at the beach. Pretty normal that one. Wearing a swimming costume at Tesco's in the freezer aisle. Eating fish fingers. It's quite mixed. Eating horses. A lot of shock on that one. Singing to plants. It's good crowd for singing to plants.
I've got a good crowd. I was going to say the same.
The plants are going to be very happy. Composting your own poo. Someone's very shocked.
You might want to expand on that, Tom, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a good one to end on because it's just a fun little experiment. But I hopefully that sort of highlights that even really simple, trivial things that you think might not sort of be particularly serious, actually we've all got quite different views on them. And that's really what I'm sort of trying to highlight with the book, is to expand our thinking to look at all these different things that we don't normally look at. And yeah, the composting your own poo one. James is smiling. I've got a composting toilet in the house here. Behind that wall behind me is a composting toilet. Vanessa and I've had it maybe 15 years, and honestly, for me, it's the single best teacher I've ever had about the environment. And these days I say, like, if you want to learn about circular economy, you got to start by closing the loop on your own poop, because it's literally the circular economy happens within your own. I mean, you've got to have somewhere you can put it. So I'm lucky I've got a garden, but then it's literally you're composting, then you're growing food in that compost, and you eat the food, you poop it out, and you put that back in the compost heap, and it's like this circular thing, and you see it happening, and you really learn about how this works. But if you flush it away, then it's just out of sight, out of mind, and you never really think about it. So little things like that, I think, are interesting ways of expanding the mind. And it's particularly amusing to feed friends tomatoes, because tomatoes grow out of, if you compost poop, you get tomatoes. That's the little magic secret, is that tomatoes love going through humans. So wherever there's a human poop, there's a tomato plant in the waiting. Yeah.
Oh, I love that one. But just touching on Fiona's question as well about how do we expand the Overton Garden for politicians, and especially, I'm just wondering, are there 3 people that if you could, you think there might be a bit of a chink there, that you'd like to read your book?
Oh, it's a really interesting question, because it's hard to know where the chinks are. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of people who look like they've got a really hard surface, and then they suddenly crack. And sometimes the ones who seem to have the hardest shell are actually the ones that are maybe the closest to cracking. So I don't know. I would love it if we had any mainstream politician. I don't really care which one it is. Any mainstream politician really start to say what they truly think and like explore more radical thoughts that maybe are not that aren't about winning an election. They're just saying what they really think and exploring ideas. So I don't care who it is. It'd be great if it was the Prime Minister, but you know. James is saying he'd like the book to be part of the school curriculum. Yeah, I mean, it would be great as well if we had some of the tech bros, you know, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. If they, I mean, I've said this before. If they had some sort of awakening, then it might be quite interesting. But who knows? But I actually think it's more important. I think we give those basically a friend of mine who definitely lives outside the Overton window. He always says if you know their name, they're in the game, and I increasingly think he's right. But I increasingly think that we place too much importance on famous people whose names we know, thinking that they are what defines the trajectory of our society, and actually they're just the people who are wielding the most power right now at this exact moment. But that doesn't mean that they're what defines the future. And I actually think that the people who I'd really like to read the book are like the masses of normal people who are thinking something's not right and I can't quite figure it out, and I'm sort of stuck in like where my thoughts have landed me. And I think if we got a critical mass of the population thinking differently, whether it's through my book or through something completely different, doesn't really matter, that would be infinitely more powerful than a few well-known people reading it and having new thoughts. So that's sort of where I'm at with it.
That's a beautiful conclusion. Go on to Overton's Garden website, order the book for yourself, and gift it to another person. I think that's so. To all of you, someone else who you would love to read that book, gift it, and then
And
I
Sam's
think
going to cut us off any
I
second
am.
now.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Sam.
It's been fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
And on to the next
Bye.
text. Cheers.